The lecture hall of the Galactic Military Academy hummed with the sounds of 200 different species breathing various atmospheres through their specialized equipment. Cadet Zaxthor adjusted his atmospheric modulator, trying to filter out the distinct methane tang that always seemed to leak from the Jovian students' environment suits. Professor Naxval's tentacles waved methodically as she traced the evolution of tactical doctrine through the ages, her chromatophores shifting between shades of blue to emphasize key points. The Arcturian War of 2845 marked a significant shift in void combat, she gestured, bringing up a holographic display of ancient warships. The introduction of quantum-entangled targeting systems meant that. Professor, Zaxthor's voice cut through the lecture, his inner eyelids blinking rapidly in confusion. These shifts show human design elements, but I thought humans were excluded from military service. When did this change? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Jovians' methane respirators seemed to pause. Professor Naxval's chromatophores drained to a sickly gray, her tentacles freezing mid-gesture. In the seats around him, Zaxthor noticed his fellow cadets either leaning away or staring with expressions ranging from horror to morbid fascination. The professor's voice emerged as barely a whisper. Class. Dismissed. When nobody moved, her chromatophores flashed danger red. Now. The evacuation was chaos. Students tripped over environment suit tubes in their haste to leave. A Regelian cadet actually molted from stress, leaving the shell behind in their seat. Through it all, Professor Naxval remained frozen, her tentacles still locked in their teaching position. As Zaxthor gathered his data slates, emergency medical drones burst through the lecture hall's doors, their scanning beams already focused on the professor. Security protocols activated throughout the campus. Subtle changes that most wouldn't notice, but his enhanced hearing picked up the high-pitched whine of defense shields powering up. Move along, cadet. A security officer appeared at his side, power armor humming. The professor needs immediate medical attention. Zaxthor joined the stream of students flowing into the corridor, his mind racing. He'd studied the regulations thoroughly before enrolling. There was nothing explicitly forbidding questions about humans, yet the reaction suggested he'd stumbled onto something far more significant than a simple military exclusion policy. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed it. The slight pressure against his lower thorax, the whisper of something being slipped into his pocket. By the time he turned, he only caught a glimpse of a hooded figure disappearing around a corner. In the safety of his dormitory pod, Zaxthor examined the data pad that had been planted on him. It was ancient tech, possibly human in origin, with no network connectivity that could be traced. A single message glowed on its scratch-resistant surface. Meet me in the quantum archives at midnight. Bring your environmental suit. You asked the right question to the wrong person. Zaxthor's species had evolved from cautious ambush predators. Every instinct told him to report this, to turn the pad over to security. Yet something stronger compelled him to take the risk. Perhaps the same drive that had led him to ask the question in the first place. In all his studies of military history, he'd never understood the conspicuous void where human military achievements should have been. As his chronometer crept toward midnight, Zaxthor checked his environmental suit's seals for the third time. The quantum archives were kept in a vacuum to preserve the ancient data crystals. One leak would be fatal. But if there was even a chance of discovering why the mere mention of humans in a military context could cause such chaos, it was worth the risk. He waited until the patrol drones passed his window before slipping out into the darkness. Above him, the Academy's 3 moons cast conflicting shadows, providing perfect cover for someone who knew how to use them. As he moved silently toward the archive building, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just breaking Academy rules. He was stepping into one of the galaxy's most closely guarded secrets. The quantum archives loomed before Zaxthor, its crystalline structure absorbing moonlight rather than reflecting it. As he approached the maintenance entrance, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. He froze, remembering his species' ancestral defense mechanisms, but forcing down the urge to deploy his quills. "Your environmental seal is off by 2 microns on the left shoulder," a voice said. The figure stepped forward, revealing the distinctive uniform of a senior cadet. "I'm Virula. And you're either incredibly brave or spectacularly foolish." Under the moon's light, Zaxthor could see she was selenite, her silicon-based skin refracting light in complex patterns. The senior cadet's cybernetic enhancements pulsed with subtle light as she interfaced with the door's security systems. "The archives are triple-locked," Zaxthor whispered. "How are we?" "Already done," Virula interrupted as the door slid open silently. "I've been planning this for months. Your question in class just accelerated my timeline." They stepped into the airlock, and Virula's cybernetics pulsed again. "I'm looping the security feeds now. Will appear as maintenance drones on any scans." The air hissed out around them as the inner door opened to the vacuum-sealed archive chamber. The quantum archives stretched out before them, endless rows of crystal matrices storing data in their atomic structure. Virula moved with purpose, leading them deep into the stacks. "These crystals," she explained, "contain military records from before the Terminus event. Most are damaged or degraded, but some still hold coherent data." She stopped at a section marked with warning glyphs. "Here, 3 centuries of human military service records." Her hands moved across the control panel, and holographic images sprang to life around them. Zaxthor's inner eyelids flickered rapidly as he tried to process the flood of information. Humans in military uniforms, standing proudly alongside aliens of all species. Combat footage showed human ships performing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics and probability calculations. "This can't be right," he muttered, watching a recording of human Marines charging through plasma fire to rescue trapped Andromedans. No species would risk such casualties for allies. "Keep watching," Virula said, her voice tight with emotion. The images shifted to official commendations, humans receiving medals from species that were historical enemies. Joint task forces where humans served as connecting links between traditionally hostile races. Training programs where human instructors taught advanced combat techniques to mixed species units. They were everywhere, Virula explained, in every major military force. Their methods were unorthodox, but their results. She called up statistical analyses. Human integrated units showed effectiveness rates up to 300% higher than standard forces. A new image appeared, the last unified meeting of the Galactic Council before the Terminus event. Species that had been mortal enemies for millennia sat together, united in what appeared to be fear. "Then it all stops," Virula said, frustration evident in her voice. "Every record after Terminus is either corrupted or sealed under quantum locks I can't break. But look at this." Proximity alarms suddenly screamed in their suits. Someone else was in the archives. "Impossible." Virula's cybernetics pulsed frantically. "My loop should have." The lights in their section went dead. In the darkness, they heard the distinctive sound of military-grade environmental suits approaching from multiple directions. "The northwest emergency shaft," Virula whispered, grabbing Zaxthor's arm. "It leads to the old maintenance tunnels. Run." They sprinted through the darkness, guided only by Virula's cybernetic interfaces with the archive systems. Behind them, powerful searchlights began sweeping the aisles. Just as they reached the emergency shaft, a voice boomed through their suit communicators. "This is archive security. You have accessed restricted military data. Surrender immediately or..." The rest was lost as Virula shoved Zaxthor into the shaft and slammed the access panel behind them. As they slid down into the unknown darkness below the academy, Zaxthor clutched the data crystal Virula had pressed into his hands during their escape. Whatever humanity's secret was, someone was willing to kill to keep it buried. The undercity of New Alexandria sprawled beneath the academy like a twisted reflection of the gleaming towers above. Virula led Zaxthor through a maze of maintenance tunnels, their environmental suits now streaked with decades of industrial grime. The signal's getting stronger, Verla whispered, her cybernetics tracking the quantum signature from a memory crystal she discovered in the archives. The Admiral should be. Should be what? A gravelly voice interrupted. Both cadets spun around to face an ancient Proximan, her iridescent scales dulled with age. Should be dead. Should be senile. Should be forgotten like the rest of us who served with them. The Admiral's environment suit was military grade, but decades old, patched with materials from a dozen different worlds. Her left arm ended in a prosthetic that looked suspiciously like human design. Admiral Chisara. Verla stepped forward. Your service record was erased, just like everything else about that time. The Admiral's vertical pupils narrowed. Follow me. The maintenance drones record everything in these tunnels. She led them through a hidden door into what appeared to be an ancient cargo container converted into living quarters. The walls were covered with hand-drawn sketches, human faces, human ships, human weapons. You're wondering why a decorated Proximan admiral lives in the Undercity, Chisara said, sealing the door behind them. Let's just say asking the wrong questions about humans can end more than just your career. The Admiral activated a privacy field, its hum drowning out any listening devices. I commanded the 47th Joint Task Force. Half my crew was human. She touched one of the sketches with her prosthetic hand. This was my XO, Sarah Chen. She. The Admiral's scales shifted to the deep blue of morning. The records say humans were dangerous, Zaxthor ventured. Chisara laughed, a harsh sound. Dangerous. They were terrifying, but not in the way you think. We Proximans pride ourselves on our warrior culture, but humans, she shook her head. They showed us we knew nothing about true courage. The Admiral activated a hologram from her prosthetic arm. This was the Rigel campaign. Standard protocol when facing overwhelming odds was to preserve forces through tactical retreat. The hologram showed a massive space battle. A human cruiser, badly damaged, positioned itself between enemy fire and a civilian transport. The human captain, Rodriguez, knew the ship couldn't survive. The logical choice, the sane choice, was to withdraw. Instead, Chisara's voice cracked. They held position. The entire crew voted unanimously to stay and die so others could live. But that's... Zaxthor struggled to comprehend. That's not tactical, not rational. That was humanity's gift, or curse, depending on who you ask. They didn't follow the rational choice. They followed their hearts. The Admiral's scales rippled with remembered emotion. Do you know what the crew was doing in their final moments? Singing. An ancient human battle hymn. They died with hope in their hearts and smiles on their faces. Verla's cybernetics pulsed as she processed this. The record suggests this behavior was infectious. Infectious. Chisara barked another laugh. It was revolutionary. Species that had calculated battle odds for millennia began acting on moral imperatives instead. The Draconids learned mercy. The Arcturus Collective discovered self-sacrifice. Even my own people. She flexed her prosthetic arm. I lost this protecting refugees. Before serving with humans, I would have considered that a waste. The Admiral's expression darkened. That's why they had to go. Not because they were violent. The galaxy had seen plenty of violent species. They had to go because they were making us better. And that terrified the powers that be. Proximity alarms suddenly blared from Verla's cybernetics. They've tracked us, she hissed. Go, Chisara ordered, pulling up a floor panel. This leads to the old subway tunnels. And cadets. They paused at the opening. Whatever you discover, remember, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or tactics. It was their capacity to inspire others to rise above their own limitations. As they descended into the darkness, Zaxthor heard the Admiral humming an unfamiliar tune. Later, he would learn it was the same battle hymn the human crew had sung in their final moments. A melody that still echoed through the galaxy, whether the authorities wanted it to or not. The military archive's security encryption, yielded to Verla's cybernetic probes like ice melting under plasma fire. She and Zaxthor huddled in an abandoned maintenance hub deep beneath the city, surrounded by holographic displays pulled from the data crystal they'd stolen. There, Verla's crystalline fingers danced through the data streams. Training Exercise 47 Beta. This is where it started falling apart for them. The footage materialized around them. A massive training complex on an uninhabited moon. Diverse species moved through combat scenarios, their training weapons emitting harmless light pulses instead of lethal plasma. Standard Joint Forces exercise, Zaxthor observed. What makes this one special? The answer came in a burst of real weapons fire. Red emergency lights flooded the complex as actual separatist forces, having infiltrated the exercise, launched a surprise attack. The footage showed the chaos as training officers realized their weapons were useless against real threats. By protocol, all forces should have retreated to defensive positions, Verla noted, but watch the human units. Instead of falling back, the human squadrons moved forward. The footage showed them sprinting through kill zones, using training barricades for actual cover. A human sergeant smashed open a sealed weapons locker, distributing the few real weapons they found to the best shooters of each species. They're not even wearing combat armor. Zaxthor's inner eyelids flickered in disbelief. Just training suits. The humans organized mixed species fire teams on the fly, positioning each alien where their natural abilities would prove most effective. A Draconid's acid spit became covert fire, and Andromedan's electromagnetic pulses disrupted enemy shields. Species that had barely cooperated in training now moved like a single organism under human direction. There, Verla froze a frame. That's when it happened. The footage showed a human sergeant, already wounded, spotting movement in a collapsed structure. The thermal scan revealed huddled shapes. A group of civilian maintenance workers trapped by the attack. The sergeant looked at her useless training weapon, then at the approaching enemy forces. Without hesitation, she charged. The footage showed her sprinting through enemy fire, using debris as improvised weapons. She reached the civilians, a mix of species requiring different atmospheric conditions, and began helping them into emergency environment suits. By every tactical doctrine, this was suicide. Verla whispered. One soldier couldn't save them all. But the sergeant's actions had inspired others. Alien troops who had been falling back now surged forward. Species that couldn't breathe the same air worked together to evacuate civilians. The footage showed incredible moments of cooperation. A massive Regellian using its armored carapace to shield wounded comrades, a Proximan medic treating injuries across 5 different species. The final frames showed the human sergeant, despite multiple wounds, dragging the last civilian to safety. As emergency responders arrived, she refused treatment until every civilian and fellow soldier had been attended to. She died minutes later, still issuing orders to protect the retreating civilians. The official report called it a tactical disaster. Verla said, her silicon skin dimming with emotion. 37% casualties. By standard military doctrine, an unacceptable loss. But they saved everyone. Zaxthor protested. Every civilian survived. That's not what scared them. Verla pulled up the after-action analysis. Look at the psychological impact surveys. The data showed a profound shift in participating troops. Alien soldiers began exhibiting what their superiors termed concerning behavioral changes. They requested joint species training, volunteered for high-risk missions, prioritized civilian safety over tactical advantage. They started acting like humans, Zaxthor realized. Worse, Verla corrected. They started questioning the fundamental assumptions of galactic warfare. Why do we accept acceptable losses? Why do we calculate the value of civilian casualties? The humans didn't just save lives that day. They planted dangerous ideas. A warning flashed across Verla's cybernetic display. Security forces are sweeping this sector. We need to move. As they gathered their evidence, Zaxthor paused on the final frame. The human sergeant, mortally wounded, still giving orders to protect others. He understood now why the footage had been buried. It didn't show humans as dangerous warriors. It showed them as something far more threatening to the galactic order. Inspirational leaders who could teach other species to overcome their own limitations. The quantum encryption on the final data crystal was unlike anything Verla had seen. Her cybernetics glowed white-hot as they fought through layers of security that predated modern computing standards. She and Zaxthor had taken refuge in an abandoned atmospheric processing plant, its ancient machinery providing cover from orbital scans. "This is it," Verla whispered as the crystal finally yielded. The terminus event, the moment that changed everything. The holographic display materialized around them, showing a vast section of space near the galactic core. Real-time tactical data scrolled across their vision. Fleet movements, combat telemetry, emergency broadcasts. By the void, Zaxthor breathed. That's the largest Drachnid fleet ever recorded. The swarm of Drachnid ships darkened space itself, their biomechanical forms moving with singular purpose. Evacuation orders flashed across countless worlds as the Hivemind fleet approached populated systems. The casualties projected were in the billions. Then a single human battle group appeared. 37 ships against thousands, Verla noted, her silicon skin pulsing with tension. Even for humans, this was... The transmission cut through their analysis. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We are implementing the Thermopylae Protocol. It has been an honor." The human ships moved in perfect formation, their maneuvers unlike anything in standard tactical databases. They weren't retreating. They weren't even trying to delay the Drachnid advance. They're hurting them. Zaxthor realized, his combat training kicking in, using their own ships as bait to guide the Hivemind into. The humans led the Drachnid fleet into what seemed to be empty space. Then Admiral Chen's final transmission played. "For those who come after, remember this. The measure of a civilization isn't in how many lives it takes, but in how many it saves." What happened next defied physics as most species understood it. The human ships detonated their reactor cores in a precisely calculated pattern. The explosions rippled through space-time itself, creating a cascading quantum reaction that none of their scientists had thought possible. The footage showed the impossible. A bubble of frozen time, trapping both the human battle group and the entire Drachnid fleet in eternal stasis. The humans had turned themselves into a temporal prison for an enemy they couldn't defeat conventionally. The casualty report, Verla's voice shook as she accessed the data. Every human in that battle group knew. The Thermopylae Protocol wasn't a military strategy. It was a suicide mission from the start. "They chose this," Zaxthor said, his inner eyelids closing in respect. "They chose to die so others could live." The records showed the aftermath. The time-locked bubble still floated in that sector of space, a monument that military vessels avoided but civilian ships visited in silent tribute. The Drachnid Hivemind, losing such a vast portion of their fleet and their connection to those trapped minds, retreated to their core systems and never ventured out again. But the human victory came at a price beyond their sacrifice. The footage showed emergency meetings of the Galactic Council, species that had been enemies for millennia now united in fear. "Listen to them," Verla said, playing the council recordings. "They're not afraid of human weapons or tactics. They're afraid of their influence." The council members spoke of moral contamination and ethical subversion. Reports showed how alien species who witnessed the Thermopylae Protocol began questioning their own military doctrines. The idea that sacrifice for others could be more powerful than self-preservation began spreading like a virus through the ranks. The time bubble wasn't just a prison for the Drachnids, Zaxthor understood finally. It became a symbol of everything humanity represented. The idea that victory doesn't always mean survival, that some things are worth dying for. Verla's cybernetics suddenly flashed red. Military patrols are converging on this sector. They're using banned quantum trackers. As they prepared to run again, Zaxthor looked one last time at the frozen image of the human ships, eternally locked in their moment of sacrifice. He understood now that humanity's exile wasn't about preventing them from fighting. It was about preventing them from teaching the galaxy a different way to wage war. Deep within the abandoned reactor core of New Alexandria's oldest power plant, Virla and Zaxthor accessed the final set of classified records. The shielding from the decommissioned fusion chamber blocked most scans, buying them precious time as security forces swept the city above. These are the sealed minutes from the emergency conclave. Virla's cybernetics interfaced with the ancient data crystal. Every major species sent representatives. Even the collective mind of the Silicon Confluence attended. The holographic replay filled the chamber with ghostly figures. Delegates from 100 species arguing in a dozen languages. The fear in their voices transcended translation protocols. The humans must be stopped. A draconic matriarch's scales flashed warning colors. Not for their weapons, but for what they're doing to our troops. Reports materialized around them. Combat footage showed alien soldiers throwing themselves into danger to save civilians. Medical logs documented medics working beyond safe limits to save members of enemy species. Training records revealed units requesting joint exercises with traditional rivals. A Proximan war prince rose, his ceremonial armor dulled in mourning. My own daughter died protecting a Regelian colony. She cited human military doctrine about acceptable sacrifices and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. These are not our ways. It's spreading beyond the military. An Andromedan representative's electromagnetic pulses showed distress patterns. Civilian populations exposed to human ideals are questioning traditional power structures. They speak of concepts like universal rights and the greater good. The Silicon Confluence's avatar flickered. Our probability matrices show a 98.7% chance that continued human military presence will fundamentally alter galactic civilization within 3 generations. They are not conquering us with weapons, but with ideas. Zaxthor watched as species that had warred for millennia found common ground in their fear of human influence. They weren't afraid of humanity's capacity for violence, he realized. They were terrified of their capacity for inspiring change. Look at this. Virla highlighted a section of the debate. The Arcturus Federation spokesperson was presenting data on psychological contamination rates. Any species serving alongside humans for more than 6 months showed a 70% chance of adopting their ethical frameworks. It didn't matter if they were predator or prey species, hive minds or individuals. The evidence was overwhelming. Soldiers exposed to humans began rejecting traditional military doctrines about acceptable losses and tactical necessity. They started forming bonds across species lines, protecting civilian populations regardless of origin, and questioning orders that put political expedience over ethical concerns. The most damning evidence, Virla pulled up the final report, came from the Terminus event. When those human ships sacrificed themselves to save billions, it shattered our understanding of warfare. Every major military power had built their doctrine on the assumption that self-preservation was the strongest motivator in any species. The Conclave's decision was unanimous. Humanity would be banned from all military service. Earth would be isolated, allowed to trade and interact with the galaxy, but never again permitted to serve in any armed force. But they didn't just exile humans, Zaxthor noted, examining the implementation orders. They systematically erased their military history, their tactics, their entire philosophical approach to warfare. Because ideas are harder to kill than soldiers, Virla's silicon skin dimmed. They could remove humans from service, but they couldn't remove their influence completely. A new alert flashed across Virla's cybernetic display. They've detected our power signature. We have minutes at most. As they prepared to flee again, Zaxthor noticed something in the final frames of the conclave recording. The delegates, after voting for humanity's exile, observed a moment of silence for the human lives lost in the Terminus event. Even in voting to remove them from the galaxy's military forces, they couldn't help being influenced by human traditions of honoring sacrifice. The irony, Zaxthor said as they slipped into the maintenance tunnels, is that by trying to suppress humanity's influence, they proved exactly why it was so powerful. Even the beings voting to exile them couldn't help being changed by their example. Behind them, security forces breached the reactor chamber, but the truth they'd discovered couldn't be contained by weapons or walls. Humanity's real crime hadn't been their methods of warfare. It had been showing the galaxy that there might be a better way. The abandoned shipyard stretched across a small asteroid at the edge of New Alexandria's defense perimeter. Verla's cybernetics had detected unusual power signatures here, patterns that didn't match any registered military or civilian operations. "This doesn't make sense," Zaxthor whispered as they moved through the darkened facility. "These maintenance bays should be decommissioned, but I'm picking up life support activity." They found their answer in Bay 17. Through the observation window, they saw what appeared to be a training session. Soldiers from a dozen different species moved in perfect coordination, their movements following patterns that weren't taught in any official military academy. "Terra tactics," Verla breathed, her silicon skin brightening in recognition. "They're practicing human combat doctrines." The training floor showed signs of regular use. Holographic projectors displayed scenarios that emphasized cooperation between species with different biological capabilities. A Draconid's acid spit provided cover, while a Proximan sniper took position. And Andromedan's electromagnetic pulse synchronized with a Rigelian sonic attack. "Look at their uniforms," Zaxthor pointed. The soldiers wore no official insignia, but each had a small blue sphere patch. Earth, as seen from orbit. Moving deeper into the facility, they discovered more. A library of tactical simulations based on historical human battles. Training manuals translated into dozens of languages, teaching concepts like "no one left behind" and "victory through unity." Memorial walls honored fallen comrades across species lines. "This isn't just one facility," Verla said, interfacing with a forgotten terminal. "It's part of a network. There are hundreds of these training camps hidden throughout the galaxy." The data showed the spread of human military philosophy despite the ban. Underground academies taught human tactics. Veteran soldiers passed down stories of serving alongside humans. Even official military units have begun incorporating human concepts, disguising them as tactical innovations to avoid scrutiny. They found a briefing room where a grizzled Arcturus veteran taught a class on human battle strategies. "The official doctrine says to calculate acceptable losses," he told his diverse audience. "But humans taught us that every life has immeasurable worth. Sometimes the most logical choice is to reject logic entirely." In another section, medics from traditionally hostile species trained together, sharing techniques that prioritized saving lives over tactical advantage. "Species differences don't matter when someone's bleeding out," a Jovian instructor declared. "That's something we learned from human combat medics. It's not just military techniques spreading," Verla noted, analyzing the data. "It's their entire philosophical approach to warfare." They discovered evidence of military units secretly adopting human traditions, moments of silence for fallen comrades, regardless of species, medals awarded for saving lives rather than taking them, training exercises that emphasized protecting civilian populations. A memorial wall caught Zaxthor's attention. It displayed images of famous human military actions, including the Terminus event. Below each image, soldiers had left tokens of respect. Medals, rank insignia, personal items. Species that once would have never acknowledged each other's sacrifices now honored them together. "The authorities tried to erase humanity's military legacy," Zaxthor said, examining the wall. "But they couldn't erase the change they inspired in others." Verla's cybernetics suddenly pulsed with alarm. Multiple security forces converging. They're using high-level clearance codes. But before they could flee, a hidden door opened. A diverse group of veteran soldiers emerged, led by the Arcturus instructor they'd seen earlier. "We've been watching you too," the instructor said. "Not many cadets would risk everything to uncover the truth about humanity." He gestured to his companions. We're what the authorities feared most, proof that humanity's influence couldn't be contained. Their ideas about warfare, about sacrifice, about unity. They live on in all of us. As security forces surrounded the facility, Verla and Zaxthor faced a choice. They could surrender and protect the status quo, or they could join this underground movement keeping humanity's military legacy alive. The answer, they realized, was obvious. After all, they'd already learned humanity's most important lesson. Some things were worth risking everything for. The command center of the underground facility hummed with tension as security forces breached the outer perimeters. Verla's cybernetics interfaced with the base's systems, while Zaxthor watched their gathered evidence compile into a data burst. Every major military academy, the Arcturus veterans said, marking points on a galactic map. Every command center, every news network, one transmission, and the truth goes everywhere. They'll try to suppress it, Verla warned, her silicon skin flickering with calculation patterns. They've buried this secret for centuries. But they can't suppress the changes it's already caused, Zaxthor replied, watching the veteran soldiers around them. Each wore that small earth patch, a reminder of principles that had outlived exile. The security forces' ultimatum boomed through the facility. This is a Class 1 military violation. Surrender immediately or face maximum response. The veteran soldiers took defensive positions, not out of habit, but from choice. Species that had once been mortal enemies now moved in perfect coordination, protecting each other's vulnerabilities. They weren't just fighting together. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. You don't have to do this, the Arcturus veteran told the cadets. You can claim we coerced you. Return to the academy. Have the careers you trained for. Verla's fingers hovered over the transmission controls. Everything we've believed about military service, about acceptable losses, about the fundamental nature of warfare. It's all built on a lie. Not a lie, Zaxthor corrected. A choice. They chose to reject humanity's influence because it threatened their control. Now we make our choice. The facility shook as breaching charges detonated at multiple entry points. Verla's cybernetics flashed warning signals as elite security teams began their assault. Do it, Zaxthor said. Verla initiated the transmission. Their evidence burst across the galaxy. The training incident footage, the Terminus event records, the Conclave's true deliberations. But more than just data, they transmitted the story. Humanity's legacy of sacrifice, of valuing lives over victory, of proving that warriors could choose to be protectors rather than just soldiers. Transmission complete, Verla announced as security forces stormed the command center. It's everywhere. Military networks, civilian channels, academic databases. They can't erase it all. The facility's defenders lowered their weapons as elite troops surrounded them. There was no need for further resistance. The truth was out. The ranking security officer, a Draconid commander, surveyed the scene. Her scales shifted colors as she processed what she was seeing. Veterans of a dozen species standing together, wearing the symbol of a world they'd never served. You realize the consequences, she stated, not really a question. We do, Zaxthor replied. The same choice humanity made. Some things matter more than our careers or even our freedom. The commander was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her armor and pulled out something that made Verla's cybernetics pulse in surprise. A worn patch showing Earth from orbit. My grandmother served with them, the commander said quietly. Before the exile. She never stopped telling their stories. She looked around the facility, at the evidence of soldiers choosing to carry on human traditions despite the ban. Perhaps it's time everyone heard those stories. Across the galaxy, the response began. Young cadets discovering that their textbooks had omitted the most important lessons of military history. Veterans finally speaking openly about the human soldiers who had changed their understanding of warfare. Command staffs confronting the reality that their most sacred military doctrines were built on suppressed truths. In the Academy's Great Hall, students gathered around screens showing the Terminus event, watching human ships sacrifice themselves to save billions. In war rooms, strategists re-examined their calculations about acceptable losses. In training grounds, instructors began openly teaching principles they had passed down in secret for generations. The change humanity had started centuries ago couldn't be stopped now. The galaxy would have to confront the question that had haunted them since the Exile. What kind of warriors did they want to be? Those who fought for victory at any cost, or those who fought to protect something greater than themselves? The answer, Verila and Zaxthor knew, would reshape military doctrine for generations to come. Humanity's greatest victory hadn't been won through force of arms, but through force of example. They had shown the galaxy a better way, and now finally, that lesson would be heard.